Let's speak to Dan Perry now, who's a former regional editor of the Associated Press. He also served as the chair of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Dan, welcome back to Al Jazeera. As a seasoned journalist of the Associated Press, you know the value of messaging and communications. How will Israel justify the killing of Hezbollah's senior spokesperson, a civilian, rather than a military figure within Hezbollah?
I think Israel will basically project that Hezbollah is completely legitimate, regardless of the role played by a particular person. I know it's true that his role made this more edgy, but there is a narrative that says that anyone contributing to the Hezbollah effort to justify attacks on Israel, and remember they were rocketed for over a year, for about a year before they began serious action to make it stop. I think they're just going to press on until Lebanon agrees to the proposal that was put on the table, in which the Americans are currently taking to Beirut. That involves Lebanon somehow asserting its own sovereignty over its territory, including the south bordering Israel. The Israelis don't feel at this point like they can tolerate Hezbollah anymore. And I would urge that we all understand there's a political aspect in Israel as well. I mean, the government, fears non-re-election in a couple of years. The situation with the Palestinian arena, slightly different. Israel's divided on everything about the Palestinians, and there really is a broad landscape. And the poll just Friday showed that 69% of Israel would agree to end the war in exchange for the hostages, meaning leaving Hamas, what's left of it, in charge of Gaza, which is not necessarily a great outcome. On the Lebanese front, no one wants to harm Lebanon. I haven't met a single Israeli that wants to harm Lebanon, but they're just finished with Hezbollah. And these nuances of what particular role Mr. Afif held or didn't hold, that doesn't interest them. And this includes the most peacenik of Israelis. They want Hezbollah gone, and they don't believe that there should be a non-state army, partly controlled by Iran, on their border, free to rocket them and dig tunnels in aid of a future invasion.
I wonder, given that this is a war on many levels, it is, of course, a military war, but it's an information war as well, the elimination of a public-facing individual, a conduit between the armed Hezbollah movement itself and the media, whether removing that figure from the equation really makes a difference whatsoever, given how preeminent, how dominant the Israeli narrative continues to be throughout this. It seems like the entire media landscape is skewed very much towards Israel at the moment.
It's funny. The Israelis are rather convinced that the whole world is against them, and they blame the incompetence of their government's messaging. They sometimes blame the actions. They blame anti-Semitism. They think the opposite. But I do agree with you that there is far more support for Israel's goals and even tactics on the issue of Lebanon. And honestly, I talk to a lot of people, including the Arab world, about this all the time. I haven't heard a credible defense of the presence of Hezbollah on a border controlling Lebanon and embroiling this poor country that should be a paradise on earth in never-ending war with a neighboring nuclear power. It's madness. So the Israelis feel they have the upper hand on messaging here. I think you're right to suggest that the world basically supports it. And there probably needs to be a deal, either 1701 or 1559 being implemented. And basically the difference is that the earlier 1559 requires the militias to be disarmed. Again, a highly defensible goal, which Lebanon itself agreed to about 20 years ago, but that's going to be difficult to do. I think Lebanon is, however divided, a society and a pragmatic, mostly pragmatic and modern society. And they simply have to decide if they're willing to try to lay down a law with Hezbollah.
OK. Dan Perry, always good to hear your thoughts. Dan Perry, former regional editor of the Associated Press. Thank you.
And Dan Perry now, he's a former regional editor of Associated Press, and he served as chairman of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. Joins us now from Tel Aviv. Good to have you, Dan. Let's pick up on something that Ali Morad said just then. He said that Israel is now choosing civilian targets because it's finding it hard to reach the new military commanders of Hezbollah. Would you agree with that?
No, I think they're simply trying to put maximal pressure on Hezbollah and indeed on the state of Lebanon to bring an end to a situation that they deem completely unacceptable. I understand that Mr. Afif is viewed as a non-military figure, but as was just reported, he also was announcing the Hezbollah attack on Netanyahu's house. And in any case, the Israelis aren't that interested in this distinction at this point. It's a nuance. It matters in some contexts. It has ceased to matter to Israel. They don't want, I don't think, to cause civilian casualties or necessarily to damage civilian infrastructure in Lebanon, I assure you. In fact, they don't think they're fighting the Lebanese people, as was said just now by the previous speaker. They really do think they're fighting Hezbollah only. They believe that is an incredibly righteous thing to do and practically a favor to the people of Lebanon. It's kind of funny to hear about fears that Israel would violate Lebanon's sovereignty when right now the violation of Lebanon's sovereignty is performed by Hezbollah. And the basic demand, I believe, of most of the world community is that Lebanon basically enforce its sovereignty over its territory.
One wonders, though, what pressure this particular assassination does put or add to Hezbollah, because it's certainly not going to stop the firing of rockets over the border. It's certainly not going to allow the people in northern Israel to return to their villages.
Yeah, but what would allow that is if the deal put on the table by Hochstein would be accepted by all sides, implicitly by Hezbollah as well, and enforced by the state of Lebanon. I strongly suspect that the state of Lebanon will need some sort of assistance by the Arab League or an international force or some sort of outside assistance to actually make good on this deal. If Hezbollah chooses to not play along in reality, but I don't think Hezbollah is not affected by this kind of assassination. I mean, clearly Israel's message is that anything that carries the label of Hezbollah after a year of the rocketing that they absorb from Hezbollah is illegitimate.
As you said yourself, though, and as Ali also said, that one of the problems about this ceasefire plan, if indeed it is the same proposal that we were hearing about a few days ago, is this demand by Israel that it be free to strike inside Lebanon any time it feels that the deal is violated. I understand that right now there's a greater violation happening with Israeli troops on the ground, but that is not something that Lebanon is likely to accept in the long term, is it?
I agree. It's formally, it's not something that I would expect Lebanon to accept. However, some mechanism needs to be put in place to ensure that whatever the deal, whatever the arrangement is enforced. And Lebanon has, for the past 20 years, basically been saying we're too weak to do anything about Hezbollah. So Israel's skepticism, I think, is not unfounded. As I said before, I think it'll need some variant of international guarantees and maybe even Arab assistance to Lebanon. But I can't underscore this enough. Israel, where I'm currently living, is a country that's very divided on almost everything, and certainly on a Palestinian issue, but not on Lebanon. They want peace with Lebanon, and they feel that Hezbollah is basically a tool of Iran, an agent of chaos, and an impediment to reasonable relations with their northern neighbor.
Just one more question, sorry, if you wouldn't mind. We were seeing, obviously, a time of transition in the US. All of this, some would say, is happening before the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House. But to what extent do you think Netanyahu is feeling emboldened right now to carry on his war aims, knowing full well that he's going to have 4 more years of Donald Trump?
I would agree. I think so. On the other hand, Trump is famously impatient with forever wars that go nowhere. Netanyahu stands accused of basically engineering such a situation for political reasons by much of the Israeli body politic. So, yeah, I mean, the new administration is going to have pretty close to 100% sympathy for Israel's desire to eradicate Hamas and Hezbollah. And I personally assess that much of the Arab world also does. The methods are a different issue. The incoming administration is going to care a lot less than the Biden administration did about humanitarian concerns in the Gaza Strip, for example. Of course, on the other hand, Netanyahu is going to have a very difficult time going against Trump. He's pretty much bet the farm on Donald Trump, and that gives Trump some leverage. If Trump wants Israel to do certain things differently, and I strongly suspect he might eventually. Then he might find a more compliant Netanyahu. Remember, Trump did get Netanyahu to agree to a Palestinian state in 2020, maybe not on the borders the Palestinians want, and indeed were offered before. But that's a principle that the current government of Israel rejects. So it might not be all wine and roses for Netanyahu and Trump necessarily, but certainly it gives them leeway at the moment.
Dan, many thanks indeed for joining us there from Tel Aviv. That's Dan Perry.